And we're live. My name is Kenzie Dodds, and I have some questions about the serverless framework. And Kevin Old is kind enough to answer some of those questions for me. Yeah, basically, maybe Kevin, you can give a brief rundown of what serverless is. And I brought you, or I asked you to come on with me because of a blog post that you have about using GraphQL with serverless. And so maybe you can talk about that too.
Yeah. I appreciate you wanting to chat about this. Serverless is pretty interesting to me these days because I've spent a career managing servers, and I spend a lot of time on the front end now, and so I don't want to manage as many servers. I saw this project on Hacker News back in I guess it was June or July, and it was called JAWS, and it allowed you to spin up, use your node functions in AWS Lambdas, and your interface was the command line. And I was just so intrigued by that because when Lambda first came out, I was like, oh, wow, this is going to be cool. I'm going to be able to put code like in these containers and have it run. And then I go to the interface and it says upload a zip file through your browser. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. They lost me there. Like I was just gone. It's kind of like the reaction I had when I was at JSConf and they were introducing React, and then they started out with JSX, and it just lost me there. And I was like, okay, no. And then fast forward 2 years, and I was like, React has helped me out quite a bit. So, I was really intrigued to see JAWS come on the scene, and then later in the year, it kind of rebranded to serverless. It's just a really intriguing project, and the idea of kind of breaking things down into very small functions and having those run on endpoints. I don't know. It's a really, really cool project.
Cool. So maybe I can explain my use case, and you can kind of talk about how that might be accomplished.
Sure.
Well, I have a couple of things that I would like to build with a serverless kind of solution. Most of them are pretty one-off automation related things. And so one example is I built this tool that it's called Rebase and Merge. And basically the dream is to make a Chrome plugin that you can install, and on GitHub, you have that merge button. But with GitHub, they force no fast forward merge, and it drives me nuts because it makes my Git history look like garbage. And so what I'd rather do is have it do a rebase and then do a fast forward merge. And so history's clean. And so I use this service called webtask.io, and it also is kind of a serverless solution. But they recently changed their pricing strategy to be the free tier only lasts 30 days for your web tasks. And so I think for my specific use case, they said they'd be open to having me like go longer, but I don't know. I'm still kind of like, let's look at serverless. So so basically all that it does is because I don't have the extension right now, you create a bookmarklet that will like get the information from the page and then send your browser to a URL that passes your auth token and the other things that you need. And then my web task will run and do all the Git stuff that it needs to. And so is that the kind of thing that serverless would work well with?
Absolutely. Yeah. That is a great use case. I'll talk about the authentication stuff in a minute. I'm currently wrestling with that piece of the puzzle, but your use case to where you have a computation that needs to be done. Okay. In your case, it's managing the Git history and, having that clean history. And I'm right with you. I love a clean Git history. Like it, if you don't have that, and I don't have that day to day in the company I work for, and it bothers me something terrible, but I make do. But yeah, I mean, that use case where you need to compute something, and you could even manage the auth portion kind of in that Lambda. The only thing that Lambda functions restrictions I'm aware of right now are that they don't want it to run for more than 10 seconds. So that kind of covers the majority of computation, basic computations that we do in a function. So if you just think about like what you would normally expose in an endpoint, to say, go get these records from the database, process them, serve them, that of course is going to take very few seconds or milliseconds to do. And the get operation obviously is going to take that as well. You do have to be mindful of what's on the, in the container. I don't know if Git is in there on that version. So what they do is they have a container that runs your code, and if you have dependencies that are outside of Node, for instance, for npm modules, you really include those in there. So if you need to, include a bundle of those, or I use Babel in the serverless GraphQL project that I did, and that produced that was able to compile everything I needed and ship it up with the bundle. That's what serverless provides for you, is that ability to have your imports and require statements, and then it builds the zip file that is your bundle and kind of pushes it up there. So for your, I'm certain that I don't know if the actually in your case, I don't know if Git is in a container, but I know that Tim Caswell has a JS Git implementation, and I mean, honestly, that would be my first place to explore, would be to try to use that, since it is JavaScript, and you can npm install it, and then serverless will bundle that and send it up with inside the container, so that when the container needs to boot, it has everything it needs. It doesn't have to go fetch anything. So yeah, I mean, but that's definitely the use case. On the auth piece, you could certainly implement a poor man's authentication inside the Lambda, to say, okay, because what it gives you is essentially a handler. So you can say, here are these request parameters, and then process them however. And if you want to execute based on the authentication, you can do that. I've seen a couple of serverless projects that have implemented JSON Web Tokens, and so you could put a little routine in there to validate if you send it so it could literally be a DOM function, or a DOM Lambda function that just receives a JWT and validates it, and then if it's valid, then it goes and does exactly what you want. So yeah, I think it would be a good use.
So what I did with the last one was I just said, hey, when you're creating your bookmarklet, just create a auth token in GitHub, and then add that as part of the bookmarklet. And so like that, the auth token comes with the URL. But I wonder if like maybe there's some security implications there by having it just as like part of the URL.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, that auth piece in this serverless architecture, to me right now, that's where I'm closing the loop, right? But I've got to close the loop on that. And so what serverless gives me right now is the ability to have my computations accomplished for me. And that was missing, when I was deploying like S3 websites, so I get a static website on S3, but then I need to do some kind of computation. Well, I've got to fire up a server and all that. And so, while it is nice to have things separate, to have your pages over here and have them call to an API that you manage, if you want to get away from managing servers and or updating dependencies and security and so forth, which is one thing I would really like to do, because not that I don't like administering servers, but I would rather focus on my app these days. And so not having to worry about that is extremely freeing. So that computation bit that Lambda offers is really awesome. The part that gets me is the auth. And by that, I mean, Amazon's come out with a service called Cognito, which manages it really manages the transaction between a authentication provider. That to me is the best way to think about it. In that it will authenticate with Twitter and say, is this person who they say they are? And Twitter says, yes, they are. And then Cognito sends that on to the services for identity. And it literally is to, to kind of scale out that identity issue and auth, so that mobile developers, or for instance, I'm pretty sure that they use it on the Kindle to say this Kindle for the Internet of Things, right? We've got all these devices and they need an ID, and all of those providers want to know is this person, what can I associate with this person who's using my app? And in my opinion, I don't think the majority of those use cases are super secure as far as what they're trying to accomplish. Now, interacting with that Twitter, token that they're storing and storing that user's data against, I do think that is secure because you're going between that one thing. But the things I'm thinking about are how do we bring enterprise software into this space of serverless? So I've worked with a lot of projects that have multi-user and multi-role implementations. So you have admin and you have people that can have certain roles for business applications, whether it be an invoice admin or an invoice user, or they're simply able to just approve it. And that's the piece of the authentication loop. And it would be the authorization level that I feel is missing right now. I'm not really sure how to go about with Cognito and get the authentication I need and the authorization, which it feels to me like that's leaving my endpoints open if I'm not able to do that. So
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. I think you're right, that this is kind of a new technology, and like it's going to take a little bit of time to cover those big use cases. But for stuff like what automation and different things like that, like what I want to do, I think this is a great use case. So can you talk about really quickly, like if I were going to spin up this specific, rebase and merge thing, what would I do? Like what does serverless give me, and what are the actual commands that I execute to make this happen?
yeah, absolutely. So serverless gives you exactly what you need out of the gate. So you're a command line person, and you simply we have on the serverless username on GitHub. There is a serverless starter project that you can install. So you can npm install serverless, and then you can run serverless project. I forget the it's not initialized, but it's I believe it's oh gosh, it was added a couple of releases ago, but it allows you to clone that project. It's not clone, that's the word I want to use. Install, I'm sorry. So serverless project install, and then you give it the name of the project. Serverless project is installable if you publish it as an npm module. So that you're not installing it from the GitHub repo, you're installing it from npm. So that's really all you'd have to do, and then you get that serverless directory, and you would go in and implement your function inside of there. So in the handler, and there's awesome docs that explain the setup. There's a little bit of structure to kind of come up to speed on components and then functions inside those components. There was a level of modules, but that's been removed. So it's really just components and functions. So you kind of implement your logic, and then there are commands. So you can run the serverless command inside your project, and it will give you a menu of what you can do. So if you want to run your function locally, you can serverless function name and then function run, and then give it the name of the function, and it will run that like it would be run on once it's deployed. And
that's super awesome.
Yeah, and then when you deploy, you can you serverless dash deploy. So dash is a little menu that gives you the choices. So it'll give you a list of your functions, and you can say, I want to deploy the function, and I want to deploy the endpoint. Before you can do that, you have to go to the AWS console, and you have to generate an ID. I'm sorry, an IAM user that has the necessary authentication to interact with S3, with API Gateway, and with obviously Lambda. And so there's a very quick start in the docs that lets you spin up kind of an admin user. It shows you how to just do I believe it's a power user. I think that'll still work. And then you're able to kind of deploy. And what it will do is on that deploy, it'll go and it'll create in API Gateway, it'll create the URL structure that is the folder structure you've defined via the component and the function. So if you have blog as your component name, and you have the function name of index, then it will give you a URL that is blog/index, and it will create that in API Gateway and orchestrate the necessary CloudFront templates that live in JSON files inside that project. It'll do all that for you via that command. So yeah, it's pretty quick to get started. Yeah,
that's pretty cool. So I was trying to think of if there was any. Oh yeah, so bundling. Will server, like, let's say that this is not a trivial Lambda that I'm writing. Like, it's still technically a pure function, but it's not small, and I want to organize code in such a way that I don't hate myself when I come back to maintain this thing later. How do you do bundling? Do you use something like Webpack yourself, or will serverless bundle it for you?
So if you need to break up a lot of code, so I have an implementation. Well, you mentioned it earlier. So I took serverless, and I took something I'm playing with a lot these days, GraphQL, and I was like, holy cow, I can put those two together, and then I've got GraphQL that I can get at my data in Lambda, and it's just like so awesome. And so that data happens to live in DynamoDB in the example that I coded up. And it could live anywhere, right, in those GraphQL type definitions. So I was like, man, this is so awesome. And I've got a chunk of code that is not a part of the endpoint, the function. It's just the GraphQL piece. So that's in a lib directory. So all of your, break your code up like you normally would, organize it in modules, and expose what you need, the functions you need, exporting them. But just keep that in lib. And then to answer your second question about bundling and so forth. So this was the first project that was using ES6. So I have been using ES6 on the front end for several months, and I didn't want to give that up. And so there's a plugin that Serverless offers called a Serverless Optimize plugin, or Optimizer, I believe. I would highly recommend using that with all of your serverless projects, because it will compress the build. So if you have node modules that go with it, you want that that zip that's produced to be as small as possible. And I was seeing with the GraphQL implementation before I did the optimizer, I was seeing 38 megs worth of code going up. That included all the modules that needed for GraphQL and all of that stuff. It was pretty huge, and it went down to about 58 kilobytes. So once it was compiled, yeah, it was like, wow, okay, I'm completely sold. But that plugin in there, there's configuration you can put in your serverless JSON that says run this through Babel. So and if you go to the serverless github.com/serverless-GraphQL-blog, you can see that implementation there. And that is implemented with ES6. So you can use ES6 syntax, which I do. And so all the GraphQL stuff kept that same syntax that I use other places, which is ES6. And then it compiles it as part of that, that optimizer plugin. The only downside is that you can't run those functions locally, which is probably not a big deal in my case, where I am working with DynamoDB tables. So I wouldn't have those locally anyway. And so it wouldn't be able to go, it wouldn't be able to get that. So,
Sure.
but yeah, those are, that's really the best way. You can manage it just like anything else. And it kind of forces you to not put a lot of stuff, if you're in the Rails world, there were the concept of fat models and skinny controllers. And so your controller method or your handler that's your endpoint, it's very small. It's literally, I literally have a line in there that calls to a function that I've implemented in lib.
Cool. Okay. I think I asked that question, I think, based off of an incorrect assumption. So maybe you can validate my new assumption. So with WebTask.io, they only allow you to upload a single file, a single JavaScript file, and that is your function.
Oh, okay.
So with now it sounds like with Lambda, you upload an entire zip file that has a package JSON, and it'll just run the main. Is that how it works?
I've honestly not examined the zip file. I know that one of the outputs is I know that my serverless GraphQL blog was compiled into a single file because I was running into some issues where things were being redeclared. Babel wasn't running the right way. So it was saying, hey, you're redeclaring this. And because it had concatenated everything into a single file. I don't know. I've got to peek under the hood of the zip file. I don't know. To me, it feels like there may be a little bit more in there. I'm not certain if it runs. I don't know. Like that's a great question. I don't know. I've got to dig. That's where, being the consumer, I've kind of just it's left that as a huge abstraction to me, and I'm still able to do what I need to do. So
yeah, that's cool. It sounds like it covers some pretty solid use cases, and certainly would cover the use cases that I have for just some automation stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, well,
Yeah.
one thing that I'm a little bit nervous about, or not nervous, but just like not looking forward to, is all of the complexity around setting up like roles and permissions and stuff on the Amazon side, because like that is the most confusing user interface that I've ever used, and like they've got to cater to the huge enterprises like Netflix and Dropbox and whatever, to like, so that it works for their use cases. But for like a little guy like me trying to just do a couple automation things, it's just like, whoa, this is way too much stuff. Do you have to worry about that as much with serverless?
So I think if you have to interact with the IAM roles, and so if you're able to create the few roles that you need, and from I believe I've not used it, but I believe you can give certain functions certain roles. So this and you can. It's also worth saying that you can have multiple functions inside of a project. So to back up just a bit, the terminology is project, component, function, and that's the hierarchy inside of it. So your overall project can be a collection of endpoints. So say that you're implementing a blog, and you've got, I have everything going through one endpoint with GraphQL, but traditionally I would have posts and comments and author information or whatever, right? I could have all three of those in with that, and say that I only wanted I had a set of write endpoints as well that would allow for writing. Those could be, I believe you could attach another role that would have write capabilities to the Dynamo tables to that. I mean, you are going to have to, you're entering the AWS world here. It is a bit complex, and once you get your feet wet with it and stay with it for a little bit of time, it's that barrier comes down, but it's still there. It's like, where is this? So I share that concern.
Yeah, well, that comforts me a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, it will get better, and I think that I think also some of the goals from what I've seen with working with serverless is that this kind of aims to be a project that takes that pain away for developers. So as long as I know that they just implemented event support for AWS and the 0.4 release of serverless, and also watching your CloudFormation logs. And of course, I didn't even talk about you were talking about confusion. The stuff that bugs me is, the names of things. So there's CloudFormation, there's CloudWatch, there's, Dynamo, there's 50 services, and it's like, what is that? It's like, I don't know what that is, but I'm saying that to say they add, they seem to be adding support for these other things that can help you and keep you at the command line. So I could see in the future, if you were able to define a set of JSON that would implement, what user you need and what kind of access you want to give it in a sane way, right? So sane terminology. I want this to be an admin, and I want to have Dynamo access and, something else. You may be able to define that in an array very, very sanely, right? And then it would go up and take that pain away from you.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool.
I think, I don't know. It's an active framework. They're moving very, very quickly. So it's going to be exciting to see what comes of it. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's awesome. I love this serverless direction that we're going in. I think it's cool. So I think you had a hard stop in a couple minutes. So I think unless there's anything else, we'll just say goodbye. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up?
no, I think that's about it. I'd encourage you to check out the Starterless project, or the starter project on Serverless if you haven't. And there's a Gitter chat room that is pretty active. So if you start playing with it and you get stuck, go in the Gitter chat room. It's one of the most active that I've seen. And there's always someone around the world hanging out in there that can likely answer your question. So
cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really appreciate you being on with me for a little bit, and hopefully
Absolutely.
this helps other people. But it certainly helped me. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions, and I'll do what I can to answer it, and maybe we'll learn something together if I can. So, yeah.
Oh, that's the whole deal, right?
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks, Kevin.